All right. So one thing I want to talk to you guys today about is eating at maintenance. There's a lot of confusion around what actually eating at maintenance is and why that's important. It's honestly probably one of the most overlooked aspects of fat loss, and body composition, muscle gaining as well too. It's something that a lot of people just don't have the patience to do, but it's one of the most important things that you need to do if you want to see long-term progress. So first jump into, let's talk about what is maintenance in itself. So maintenance calories are the number of calories that your body needs to sustain its current weight. Not lose any weight, not gain any weight, just hold the weight steady. And we also can call that your TDEE, which is your total daily energy expenditure. Now, everybody seems to think that maintenance is this like magical number. It's 2,475 calories, right? Like it is an actual number that's static. Like it is a number. It's not. It's not a fixed number. So your maintenance shifts up and down all the time, and it can be based on activity level, how much muscle mass that you have on your frame, stress, how well or poor that your sleep is, and how long that you've been in a deficit or in a surplus. So this is why essentially just eating the same thing over and over and over again stops working over time, because at some point that new set point, that new maintenance set point, adapts to what you have been currently doing. And if you've been eating the same for months and months and months on end, that could potentially be your new maintenance calories. Now, like I said, most people just skip this phase. Most people have never truly even eaten at a maintenance phase, and if they have, it hasn't lasted long enough. People are always either in a cut, a bulk, or they're just kind of drifting, doing whatever, right? Not really, really doing anything. But finding your true maintenance is one of the most useful things that you can do if we're looking at changing your body composition over a long period of time. So if we take a look at what your actual TDEE is, which again, your TDEE is your total daily energy expenditure, it's made up of a couple of different things. So first is your BMR, your basal metabolic rate. This is 60 to 70% of your TDEE. This is essentially just your bodily functions that, just to keep you alive. This is essentially if you just laid in bed all day, you didn't move, you didn't talk, you were just a vegetable. I guess you just laid in bed 24 hours a day, didn't move, didn't do anything but just breathe and look around, right? That's your BMR. That's how many calories that you burn at complete rest. You also have your NEAT, which is your non-exercise, activity. Uh, you know, um, sorry, your non-exercise activity thermogenesis. This is like steps, fidgeting. You just going through your daily life, and then you have your exercise activity, which is like your deliberate training. You going, to the gym, and this is kind of the smallest piece of the puzzle here, along with the thermic effect of food. And the thermic effect of food, or your TEF, is essentially just the calories that it takes to digest the food that you've just eaten, right? So these four things is the bulk of what makes up what your maintenance calories are, just on a day-to-day basis. Now, if we look at why this actually matters, like what does maintenance actually do, and why can't we just skip it? So a couple of the main things that it actually does is it resets your hormones. So you have leptin, you have ghrelin, you have your thyroid hormones. All of these are going to normalize, after a sustained deficit. So, your hunger signaling is going to start working properly again. Your thyroid output is going to be, for the most part, regulated back to normal. And this is, really why people start to feel a little better, after a few weeks of maintenance. These hormones, are ramping back up to where they need to be. And then, if we have been in a deficit for a long amount of time and then we, hop back into the maintenance phase, muscle building then becomes possible again. So you can't build muscle in a deficit. You do need a slight, surplus, but to get you out of that, deficit, you can't jump just straight to surplus. So you need to spend a little bit of time kind of in that buffer zone, which is the maintenance phase. Also looking at your metabolic rate. So, if you have been cutting for a long amount of time, that prolonged cutting is going to actually suppress your TDEE, the four things that we just talked about. And so eating at maintenance gives your metabolism room to slowly creep back up to where it should be. and essentially you're able to eat more food and sustain that current body composition that you now have. Also, your training performance is going to go up as well. Energy levels improve, recovery speeds up, and progressive overload. It becomes a lot more easier to achieve, mainly because you have more food at play, and you just feel better. Alongside the hormones coming back in as well too. So again, so we're looking at leptin, ghrelin, your thyroid. All of these hormones are going to be improving. Your TDE, is going to improve as well too, along with your training performance. So if we're looking at like what can actually be done during a maintenance phase, kind of the big key point there is going to be body recomposition. So now I will state that this is not going to happen every single time, but there is a possibility that you can have a pretty, hefty body recomposition phase, kind of inside of that maintenance phase. This is where you essentially shed body fat, you build muscle at the same time. Now, what actually is body recomposition? So this is the process of losing fat, gain muscle simultaneously. This happens most effectively at or near maintenance calories. You don't want to be too high in a surplus because at that point it's going to be, very hard to lose fat. You kind of have to teeter that line of, maintenance, deficit, surplus. It has to be, pretty much walking the line there. And then again, this works best for beginners. People are returning from a long break, like haven't done anything like dieting, bulking, nothing. They just kind of been drifting off on their own, right? And then also those coming, out of a cut that had a pretty high body fat percentage and they lost a good bit of weight. And then really anyone who has never ate at maintenance calories consistently. Now the key caveat here though is that the scale may not move much at all, but that's honestly the point, right? If you lose a pound of body fat and you gain a pound of muscle, the scale is going to reflect a zero net change across the week, right? But we know that if you lose a pound of fat and you gain a pound of muscle, your body is going to look drastically different. So if the scale holds steady while your clothes are fitting differently in a positive manner, right, then body recomposition is exactly what's taking place. And so like here's a great example here. So like before, if this scale weight goes unchanged, just notate that as well. If you were 35% body fat, let's say at 200 pounds here, and then you had a little bit of body recomposition occur here, still 200 pounds, but you're now 22% body fat. So you shifted a lot of your body weight and mass from fat. You lost a lot of body fat and gained a lot of muscle in that swing in that body recomposition phase. So that's definitely not. Again, it's something that's not, I don't want to say guaranteed, but like it doesn't happen that way every single time. But specifically, like if you haven't done anything for a long time or you're just new to this is kind of something that you could expect 9 times out of 10 to happen, just from actually changing a lot of the things that you do just on a day-to-day basis. And so next comes the question is, when is maintenance the right move? So, a lot of people need to spend more time in the maintenance phase than they do in a bulking or a cutting phase. I know some people who are in a deficit year round, and that's why they're in a deficit year round because they're trying to lose a ton of body fat, but their body is pushing back against them. They would do themselves a great big favor to just hop into a maintenance phase for 4 to 8 weeks, kind of somewhere in there, to let things restabilize, get their hormones back to where they need to be, let their metabolism kind of adapt up a little bit. But it's going to be a good fit if you've been coming off of a long cut, let's say 12 to 16 weeks that you have been cutting. That's a good time to hop into the maintenance phase. If you're coming out of a reverse diet, about to shift into like an actual cutting diet, that's a great time to do the maintenance phase. If your hormones or your hunger just seems off, and this is for a pretty prolonged period. This is not just for a 1 to a 2 week thing. This is for several weeks on end. Training performance has maybe even stalled or declined. Or maybe you just want to kind of hop into the maintenance phase to build that sustainability over a longer period of time. Now, when it's not a good fit is, obviously if you're near like a competition or like a deadline, like you have to go to the beach in like a month, right? Like hopping into the maintenance phase is not going to be ideal because you essentially stop the fat loss at that point, right? Now, granted, you could, be seeing a little bit of that body recomposition take place. But, if you have a deadline and you're, very close to that, don't have into the maintenance phase yet, just kind of ride that out, get it over with. And then once that's here, then you can swap out and go into the maintenance phase. If your body fat is high enough to where, the cut is, again, it needs to be a clear priority. I mean, if you're 40% body fat, and you obviously have a ton of body fat to lose, you probably could go ahead and just start the deficit, probably right away, I would say. Now that's all depending, kind of what you have been doing previously, but that's just kind of a blanket statement. But you probably don't need to be in maintenance at that point in time. You just come off of a bulk and you need to, shed some body fat before you go into the next phase. Or you've only been cutting for a few weeks. So like, if you get into a fat loss phase and it's week 5 or 6 and things aren't, moving the way that they need to be doing, some people may think, oh, well, maybe my hormones have downregulated this quickly. Probably not. You probably just need to increase the deficit and get you digging a little bit harder, essentially. And then, so how do we actually do the maintenance phase? So finding your actual maintenance calories is pretty simple. So what you need to do is track your calorie intake pretty consistently and pretty honestly for, let's say, 2 to 3 weeks. If your weight holds steady and you do about the same thing every day, like, you eat about the same, your activity level is about the same, and like the weight pretty much stays the same, like within a 1 to 2, maybe even like a 1 to 3 pound range, you're probably at maintenance calories, right? If you're dropping weight, then you probably need to add in a little bit of food. If you're gaining weight, you probably need to pull out a little bit of food, right? It's just kind of it's just like I guess you would say it's like a give or take, right? Like if you're, you just kind of want to get it to the point to where like everything is stabilized out, and everything is stable, and you don't really have to do anything major, like a ton of cardio, a ton of steps. It's more or less like this is easy for you to maintain, hence the maintenance phase, right? So, after you do that, that 2 or 3 weeks of tracking, if things are good, if they're leveled out, you probably found your maintenance. And then at that point, just make sure that your protein is kept high, at least a 1 gram per pound of body weight. Making sure that you train with intent. Just don't go into the gym just because it's the maintenance phase and just go through the motions, right? Like that stimulus still needs to be there, for that body recomposition to take place if we're actively trying to do that. And then the next thing is just make sure that you're running it for long enough. Most people hop into a maintenance phase. I think that 2 weeks is good enough, and in reality, 4 to 8 weeks is kind of the minimum. And even extreme cases, it could be 4 to 5 months of being in the maintenance phase. So again, give it enough time to work. And a lot of people, they get bored in the maintenance phase, because they don't think that things are like happening here. And that's not the case at all. It's more or less just making sure that what we're doing is sticking, because once we actually go into the actual cut, it tells on you every single time. If you did not stick to the maintenance phase very well, and we start a cut and we pull a good bit of food out and nothing changes, well, we probably did not hit our maintenance phase as on point, as consistent as we could have. So at the bottom line with everything though is just make sure that like you're not running full throttle, full speed in a cut or a bulk year round. You need to stop and go into maintenance at some point in time across the year. If you don't do this, you're never really like building that foundation for the next phase. You're essentially setting yourself up for failure if you're just going from cutting to bulking to cutting to bulking. Like you need to have those, maintenance periods in between, just to make sure that foundation that you just set from the previous phase is going to be able to stick. So that's all I got for you guys today. Anybody got any questions or anything at all?